And we are live.
Yes,
Hello,
fantastic.
everybody. Hello, everybody. My name is Sanket, and I welcome you all into today's session where we will go ahead and discuss about a very crucial topic that we have heard a lot. And post-pandemic, things have actually changed. Just to give you an idea, the pandemic has accelerated a trend that has been unfolding over the last decade. And as the world has grown more digital and complex, the range of decisions that leaders need to make are more broadened, spanning from big picture strategic thinking to careful execution to advancing technology roadmaps, upskilling, and engaging employees. In order to go ahead and talk more about it, we have with us today Dr. Millian Hills, who brings with him more than 20 years of experience. He is a PhD in social anthropology from University of St. Andrews and has worked in multiple roles, both academic and industry. So without further ado, let me go ahead and pass on the mic to him so that he can go ahead and get this session kickstarted. Dr. Mills, it's all yours.
Sankit, thanks so much, and thanks to all of you for joining us today on all of the multiple platforms that we're live streaming on, or if you're accessing our recording, hello to you as well. So my name is Mills, and one of the key elements of understanding the challenges that the pandemic has given us is that of adaptability and flexibility. And one of those that I know about only too well is how internet connections can become unstable. So if at any time I get any indication that the connection here is a bit unstable, you'll see me pick up my laptop and move to where I'll have a better signal. So apologies in advance if you see me walking about, but I'll try and be agile and adaptive, resilient, and of course, business continuity at the fore. So today's webinar is really a reflection on work I've been involved in before the pandemic that may have helped for some organisations and government departments in the UK, have helped them be better prepared for the pandemic, but also some of the things that we now know going into the future, organisations, public and private sector, expected kind of things you'd imagine I would speak about around retail and bricks and mortar stores, but also the digital side of things and government services, how all of those, so the bar has been raised really for expectations from citizens and consumers. So I'm going to be talking you through those. I'll start by talking a little bit about some of the credentials for me talking about these topics, because as I'm sure you're aware from accessing social media generally, or academic studies that you're involved in, reading the news, or maybe even as part of your day job or the day jobs of your family and friends, everyone's got an opinion about COVID, about organizations, about adaptability, resilience, all sorts of things. And what I'm going to do is kind of curate some of the key learning points, by no means all of them, but I think we should be talking about and thinking about. And by doing so, I will be pointing towards some articles and at least one podcast and I think a video interview for you to follow up from the slides afterwards at your leisure, where you can read around these topics and understand that this isn't just a world according to me, and that you therefore judge whether my message is good or bad, depending on whether or not you think I'm good or bad, but that others are also reaching the same kind of conclusions. And more importantly, that great organizations are doing great things, and some quite surprising and I think very impressive and progressive things, which we can learn and adapt, whether we are, as I often say when I'm teaching students over here in the UK, if you are opening a kebab shop in a street full of other kebab shops, or a sandwich shop in a street full of other sandwich shops, you can still find forms of competitive advantage, even though you are in a very, very crowded marketplace. And there's not many marketplaces which aren't super crowded. So in order to be competitively advantaged or competitively advantageous and maintain profitability, have low levels of customer and colleague churn, we need to make some cultural changes to how we work as a result of COVID, but we would probably have had to make a lot of them anyway. So let me move on then to talk a little bit about my credentials that mean, but actually before I do that, let me stick to the agenda that I have. Number one, my background, some of the conclusions and the key open source readings. This is typical of me. I've actually presented the next slide without having it in front of me. Mention of some of my relevant research and consultancy. This wouldn't be a presentation by someone with an academic background if they didn't point towards at least one of their own publications. But my defense is that the publication in question is one which describes for the first time in the open literature a very lean approach to building leadership capability, human capability for managing uncertainty and situations which haven't perhaps been encountered before in organizations, again, at any level. I've done them at C-suite, I've done them at operational and tactical level, and increasingly, obviously, we should be training everybody in the same sorts of skills as much as possible. I will try and remember, as I keep an eye on the time elapsing on my phone here, to build in a bit of a comfort break as well. Listening to me for an hour and a half or so is going to be, pretty comfortable for you. But even so, we need to think about your welfare and mindfulness as well. And of course, as Sanket mentioned, a period for Q&A at the end. So my background, as Sanket very kindly said, I am an anthropologist, and I graduated from the University of St Andrews, currently the top UK university, which is good news for them. And my specialism was to bring a very applied approach to behavioural science a very long time ago. So my career began, despite appearances perhaps, or certainly I hope, if I'm keeping my skincare regime going and my fitness routine. I began my career in 1998 when I joined the research laboratory of the Ministry of Defence in the UK. And my work there was very much trying to better understand ways to communicate with target audiences, which these days I have adapted and taken those approaches into user experience, customer experience, which is my day job. That was very exciting because it was at the cutting edge then of a wide range of technological challenges, but also in relation to doing things in the real world. So helping policymakers, helping deliver approaches and solutions to operational theatres, and increasingly moving towards the strategic centre of government, where I was lucky enough to be involved in consulting into and creating bespoke software and other products, including business continuity plans, crisis management, training, capability to run all sorts of responses to crises or mixtures of crises that came together at a particular time for organizations which represent, certainly in the UK, the top of the hierarchy, really. And also quite unforgiving environments where you can't afford to fail. The organizations cannot afford to fail because there's perhaps not someone else to recover the situation should the political centre of government fail to survive a crisis. Then we are in anarchy, and that's not anything anybody wants. So some of my clients or those who commissioned me were 10 Downing Street, so the Prime Minister's office, the central government crisis management facility capability, COBRA, just stands for Cabinet Office Briefing Room. The A is kind of added on. The Governor of the Bank of England and his various structures to respond to crises, the Royal Household, Defence, but then across the wider range of government departments, from agriculture through to justice and so on. And also, more interestingly, in many ways, responding at short order to requests and requirements from things like the Prime Minister's special representatives. So if there were a country that was a close ally to the UK and they needed some capacity building to improve democratization of their police force, for example, or accountability of their police force, then we would work together with all of the relevant departments in the UK and international partners to deliver training programs and ideas to those, or come up with very fast policy developments to enable our government to, from our money and other organizations' money, to support our allies. Also included working with UK strategic industries, so the private sector, but bits of the private sector that enable the rest of the country to continue functioning and employing people, paying taxes, and so on. And with the critical national infrastructure mainly in private hands in many countries of the world, and the UK is no exception, and in some ways was perhaps the first to risk or to start doing this, depending on your perspective. But it was very important for government to know that the private sector was as resilient and prepared for crises as possible, and that was they were as secure against the malignant, malign intent of enemies or fate, bad luck, as possible. So I also worked with trade bodies, commercial organizations, particularly as I moved into a consultancy, which myself and a colleague set up, and supported the work of some elite military units. So my work really has spanned a wide range of topics or silos, really, which are all called different names: crisis management, disaster recovery, emergency planning, business continuity, horizon scanning, risk management, etc., etc. I particularly was interested and remain interested in things which are unpredictable, and the nature of a global pandemic, the precise ways in which a global pandemic occurs and the effects it has are unpredictable. But a global pandemic happening at some point was, although it may not be unpredictable, although it may not have been predictable precisely when it happened, the fact that it would happen at some point was very much predictable. So to some degree, that explains why many governments around the world and many businesses had some capacity to respond quite quickly and quite effectively to the challenges, for example, of home working. Others struggled and really kind of scrabbled around to catch up with the challenges of reality. And that included government departments suddenly deciding they needed to buy a lot of IT infrastructure to enable their people to work from home, whereas actually a more, how should we say, culturally sensitive and pro-human, really, approach to managing their workforces would have meant that they could have been working from home 1 or 2 days a week, or more or less, depending on roles, for many months and years before this pandemic, because actually that's a very good way of getting the most out of people and making them feel most valued. And although there is a return, certainly in the Northern Hemisphere, to hybrid working now, the hybrid is pretty mild, in the same way that there are many mild hybrid electric vehicles out there. That the hybrid is, maybe 1 day in the office a week or a month, or 2 a week, or sort of, an extreme version of hybrid is, 3 days in an office. So some of these changes will not reverse, because there's all sorts of benefits, which I'm sure you're familiar with, to having lower footprint in terms of buildings and so on, and also the loss of the loss of the waste, if you like, of time of travel, commuting, and the general fact that most people don't like commuting very much. So it's great to be able to reduce that, and I suppose that also has positive environmental benefits, theoretically. So my real focus then, although it's been disguised, if you like, or presented as crisis management, business continuity, disaster recovery, emergency planning, and all these other things, resilience, is really about getting the most out of people by allowing people to be the most they can be, I suppose, if you like. And so that's really trying to, and this is a word I use quite a few times this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are, this morning perhaps, is really to unleash the capability of people. One of the concerns that I think many of us have is that human talent is so locked up within organizations that organizations are not able to leverage and exploit the talent that they have, and also that certain individuals are unable to rise as quickly or as far as they might for all sorts of reasons which aren't in anyone's interests. And the more we can do to democratize how talent moves, so that there is a much more meritocratic approach, and by no means has the UK or the West exactly solved that in general. There are some specific companies and maybe organizations which are better than others here, but it's not as though we have the magic solution that everyone else can just copy. But if we do manage to keep on pushing those pushing boundaries out of the way to stop great talent flowing from the front line to the C-suite or wherever else works across the hierarchy of an organization, so much the better. So to give one little bit of an angle into the different approach I took to building human and organizational capacity, it really was to acknowledge that if individuals are planning for or responding to a crisis, which is just a difference to business as usual, because sometimes business as usual is itself a fairly risky, risk infused or a fairly stressful existence. And most people are working in ways which they would prefer not to be, i.e. slightly more stressed, slightly too time pressured, maybe a lot too stressed, a lot too time pressured. Maybe there is a toxic work culture or pockets of toxic management. And the effects of cortisol on those individuals, the stress hormone, the malign effects of adrenaline, and the problem of people over an extended period facing these hormonal challenges to their systems are really that their health is going to suffer, and therefore they are not going to live the best lives they could, which is important, but understated often. But also, if the organization isn't getting the best out of those people, it's very difficult to, and this is something I've only learned through life experience, really, it's really difficult to make the best decisions, to come up with creative solutions that try and square circles, to try and deal with uncertainty, if your brain is distracted or impeded by cortisol. Equally, if you're getting dopamine hits from things which actually are perverse to the organization and don't actually help it, that's also not great. And that's perhaps why we see the rise of people doing things in organizations which benefit them as individuals, but are at the cost of those around them and of the organization as a whole. And having said that, there are also individuals who are extremely effective at what they do, but what they do is very unpleasant to the individuals that surround them. And I'm sometimes moved slightly to tears, really, by organizations which decide, and these are mainly in the private sector, that no matter if someone is an amazing salesperson or an amazing deal closer, if their work and their ways of working affect others negatively, even if they're extremely profitable and very popular with someone else, maybe a key stakeholder, they're actually the wrong person for the organization, because actually the organization is more than just an increased rate of closing deals or an increased rate of increasing upsell or something. The organization is more than that. It's not just a transactional machine which processes ambition and converts it into profit. The organization is there for social purposes and social values, and rooting out, grubbing out toxic leadership, bullying, harassment, and so on is, to me, something which is incredibly important. And I'm very struck when I hear stories from friends and colleagues of organizations which have a very no or low tolerance perspective on those who are effective at their day job, but achieve it at the cost of other human beings. Another dimension of interest that, or might be of interest to you perhaps, is really kind of mapping the fit of individual personalities against the challenges that uncertainty in a crisis, which is almost by nature unpredictable in the ways it will unfold and how long it will take to unfold. And those who often think that they are the very best at managing in crises may, not necessarily, this is not Mills's law, but they may be amongst the worst people to have in those roles. And I've certainly seen much of my career has been spent building capability by running scenario exercises for people to participate in. I've seen an awful lot of people very stretched by, and often reacting very emotionally to, the challenges of situations that don't happen as they want them to happen. Well, unless you have supernatural or godlike powers, you can't really change reality. So if you by personality are not able to realize that you need to adapt to the challenges reality are throwing at you, rather than complaining that reality is throwing specific challenges at you, you're probably the wrong person to be in a crisis. Equally, if you think you are going to be individually the smartest person in a room dealing with a complex business continuity challenge, which may have begun with an outage of computers, technology, but has led to all sorts of issues, including potential reputational damage, negative media coverage, lots of dissatisfied customers, effects on stock price. You know, one person cannot handle all of those consequences effectively. And we've seen, I think a good example would be the Deepwater Horizon BP case study of an individual who really thought that they were amazing at crisis management, but actually turned out not to be so amazing. The other interesting dimension, which I've learned from becoming more and more involved with cyber security and some of the more esoteric types of crime which occur, not all of it being cyber, but some of it, is sometimes we may never know what causes an event. So we have to deal with the consequences, the symptoms, if you like, but the actual causes of it may never be known and may not matter ultimately, other than the fact that we may need to be more attentive to the sort of causes that might be what we might look for in future. That might perhaps be a little bit like where COVID originated from, and the conspiracy theories, or not conspiracy theories, I'm not quite sure about it. But also it doesn't really matter because we have to handle the consequences, the impacts, rather than worrying about the causality. And again, one of the interesting elements of running scenario driven activities to build capability in risk and crisis management is that you see people who become obsessed really with becoming amateur detectives. There are others who specialize in wanting to become the figure in front of the TV cameras, which is an important role, but shouldn't really be the driver for you being involved in crisis management, business continuity. But because we may never know the root cause of an event, speculating about it rather than focusing on the business impacts, reputational damage of the effects of that unknown causality is really the key thing to do. But for those of us who know a little bit about heuristics and behavioral science, the attraction is to default to things which we are very interested in and we think we're good at. And a lot of people think they're very good at solving mysteries and putting bits together to form an explanation. A very human approach to things, but it isn't the topic of the day really that should be dominating a crisis management situation. There isn't a great deal of relevance to an airline trying to fight its way through the consequences of changes in international regulation for COVID screening of passengers by spending any time worrying about how COVID emerged, which country did it begin in, which countries did or didn't manage the situation as well as they could have done on reflection. That's totally irrelevant to keeping the brand as protected as possible, looking after customers and colleagues, and as much as possible, working out which equipment should be stored, which should be kept running, etc., etc. But the default position of many humans, which is why it's great to rehearse these things to find this out, because it won't be on a CV or on a psychometric profile, is to kind of dig into the details, to become obsessed with media coverage and try and work out what caused all of this to happen. Why is this really messed up my week, year, or decade? So that's really the background. And now a couple of high-level observations really about the effects of the pandemic on our considerations of making organizations better led and better managed. Well, really, I think the bottom line is it's the same issues as before the pandemic, but perhaps only with added urgency and rigor. And I really mean that in the sense of, certainly in my kind of employment circles of people that I touch base with and speak with, there's increasing lack of patience with organizations which aren't moving in the right direction, aren't investing in their people, aren't trusting their people, previewing terms I'm going to be speaking about in the slides to follow. And therefore, at the first opportunity, will move to where they and others are more appreciated, or where they and others are permitted, enabled to do more of the work they want to do, rather than the busy work or the presenteeism which has dominated work before. And I think if I could sum it up in a few words, it's almost as though people want to be doing the work that doesn't feel like work because it's a thing they love. And I appreciate there are some jobs where there's very little to love. So this is possibly a slightly privileged perspective, but even at the front line of retail, I would suggest that there are elements to those jobs which people in retail much prefer over others. And if you can do more of that somewhere else for roughly the same pay, or even a little bit less pay, I suggest those people will migrate as and when they get the opportunity, or maybe they will create that opportunity. Now, that's not a change. I think it's just that people have also learned from experience or observation through social media and other things that mobility is perhaps, I know it's not exactly a borderless world, but mobility is perhaps slightly more accessible to more people than had been assumed. Don't quite know how that's going to play out. Don't really know if my thoughts are as fully formed as they ought to be around that, but it's definitely a feeling that I have. Not that people can necessarily walk out of one job straight into another, but that an organization certainly won't be getting the best out of people who are both doing a job and thinking, I want to be somewhere else. And we can't expect them to disclose that, and we shouldn't be looking for that, for signs of them looking elsewhere. But I will be giving a bit of a solution later about how organizations can hold on to people, but not by imprisoning them, but love bombing them in by contrast. As before the pandemic, but ever more so now, then I believe that organizational culture is going to be, or will remain really, a key source of competitive advantage. And I'll be giving some examples of what I think are great organizational cultures and investments in them that some leading brands are pursuing in the world. Managing organizational culture, quite difficult, and again, not always easy to do. And some of the attempts made to create amazing cultures have been fairly disastrous, because there's been a disconnect between the examples from the top of the organization and the expectations from the rest of it. So another element of transparency and honesty and authenticity, all those type of dimensions, I think need to be drawn in as well, where actually if we want the best people to perform in the best possible way, the best possible example needs to come from the C-suite as well. And when the C-suite is faced with a problem or a nettle to grasp, that they grasp it effectively and deal with those situations rather than, maybe certainly in the West, there's been a tradition of paying problems to go away. There's been an outbreak of non-disclosure agreements when legal remedies are pursued, and so on and so forth. That kind of era feels to me like it's coming to a close, and a good thing too. If we want, and I suspect we all do, high performance cultures in organizations, whether it's in healthcare or production or something else, that's also going to need the values of empathy and humanity, that we're going to need to anticipate how working in a high performance culture makes our people feel, and how we can really preserve and enhance our human touch to make sure that those individuals are protected and given all that they need and curated and allowed to develop should they want to. And of course, not everyone want to. So having HR and other interventions which can sense both what colleagues want and need, and also future consumer or citizen needs, is more and more vital than ever. And I think being able to, just skipping a point or two ahead, collect and interpret sort of weak signals of the directions things are going, of the sort of changes in mood of consumers, colleagues, citizens, really, really important. And there's never been more data available, and there's never been probably more difficult to process it. But the data's out there, and organizations also which have been very good at understanding why it is, or sort of how it is, that people are becoming maybe a little bit less committed to their work, or that consumers are beginning to drift away from loyalty to a brand. They've always been able to pick up on these weak signals anyway. Other organizations which have always tended to rely on responding to very gross signals in the form of, for example, complaints or a significant decrease in an NPS score or a CSAT score, these lagging indicators are probably going to be, if you're running them quarterly or once a year, that's probably going to give a scrappy, hungry startup time to sneak in and perhaps steal away well, maybe colleagues, but certainly consumers, customers in that interim period, because whilst you're busy waiting for certainty, going back to some of my observations earlier about certainty and uncertainty, while you're waiting for certainty about whether people are really becoming unhappy, other people have already worked out that, yes, those customers can be peeled away quite easily by offering a sweet deal, something which is easier, something which is faster, something which is more fun, or something which makes your product or service irrelevant. The whole kind of blue ocean strategy side of things, which again is super exciting. I also feel that the whole agenda around diversity, inclusion, and progressive political environments within businesses where we bring our whole selves to work, obviously with sensitivity to different cultural communities and regions of the world, but in general, I think business is recognized by so many people to be a driver of positive change. And certainly in the US, I think without being too politically controversial, we've seen a lot of organizations leading the way in being progressive, whilst some of the perhaps more local state level political directions have been quite retrograde and removing rights whilst businesses increase those rights. So waiting for NPS results to feed through, or a CSAT response to feed through, waiting for the outcome of an annual staff satisfaction survey is increasingly going to be a very slow and probably too late way of keeping up with the temperature of a mood, the barometer of opinion, of mood, of feeling around your product, service, or what it's like to work for you or for me. So I would suggest, and I don't have the links here, but in later slides there will be kind of relevant links, but the approach that companies like Southwest Airlines have adopted, and it's an amazing story of a startup, the fighting with regulators story of Southwest Airlines, which was the original low-cost airline, which has been much copied or has inspired many other low-cost airlines elsewhere in the world, is an incredible story because they are all about they began at an airfield called Love Field, hence their stock market ticker sign of LUV, or love. But they do have a genuine passion, commitment to customers, which means, and colleagues, therefore, as well, because you only get that expressed towards customers if you pursue it towards your employees, your colleagues first. And that means that everybody goes above and beyond. And as part of that, of enshrining that, of making that a standard operating procedure, everybody in Southwest Airlines is a stockholder. For those of you who are somewhat familiar with the American business space, that's an approach which T-Mobile USA adopted more recently by turning every customer also into a stockholder, which is quite extraordinary. And given the commercial success that T-Mobile has had, and for sure Southwest Airlines have had, it's really quite surprising to me that those examples aren't taught much more commonly in business schools and elsewhere, but also that businesses don't more slavishly follow their approaches because they just work. And I think that's really where we see with startups and the whole vesting approach, where everybody in a business, just have a look at the jobs on Otter and other places, everyone in a business has a certain equity stake in the startup. That's a great version of that transplanted to the startup stage. But of course, not every startup will become a unicorn. Not every startup is the future Tesla. Many could be. But I think having that genuine ownership of the company, not just in terms of lip service, but in terms of actual stocks and shares or equity, really, really important and vital. And those who've written extensively about Southwest Airlines credit that part ownership by each individual employee as being the only way you can have I forget the precise numbers, but whatever it is, let's imagine it's an 11 minute turnaround of an aircraft. So passengers disembarked, quick clean, cabin crew refresh themselves in the cabin, or maybe there's a change of crew, reload, get all the luggage on and get the aircraft back in the air, earning money again. If you're going to do that in 11 minutes or 15 or whatever Southwest's times are, which are considerably faster than a lot of the copycat successors elsewhere in the world and in the US achieve, that's really only done through a comprehensive mixture of technology, investment in technology, great organization, great logistics, great, one aircraft fleets, etc., but also that orchestration of the culture of the organization to make that happen. And therefore, when things go slightly wrong, and we've seen that with luggage in the past week or so with Southwest Airlines, but also with a few in-flight emergencies where there've been non-fatal but very scary, which you're going to have from time to time, mechanical issues with their aircraft. There's an enormous depth of trust and feeling of safety around the airline, such that people tend not to have an issue reboarding a Southwest Airlines flight or the same day, and there's no viral consideration that there might be issues with maintenance or safety or anything like that with the airline. They can rely on that deep commitment, that deep, I would say, love, probably reflected back from customers in those moments of adversity. And that's the great thing about having a deep and trusted brand value, is that when things do go slightly wrong, and because you are used to communicating with your people and your customers very clearly, you can count on them when things get rough. I've listened to many interviews that have been conducted with the original founder of Southwest Airlines, and the fact that they and also an amazing Continental Airlines turnaround story case study in the Harvard Business Review, both of those examples about aviation, but both of those examples characterized as well by the fact that how you let people go when times are tough, if you have to have layoffs, for example, and many companies have through COVID and other economic downturns, Brexit and so on, how you let people go is a reflection of the values of the business and what you actually stand for when times get tough. But also, if you treat those people with dignity, with generosity, going above and beyond what contractually you might have to do or what you could get away with, that sends a very powerful message to the staff who are left behind, who are still working with the company. But it also means when things pick up again, you'll be able to get those awesome people back in again. And that, again, is a huge competitive advantage because, well, I suppose on a very basic level, the training overhead and training burden will be lower, but you will already know that those people are your people. And that's hugely advantageous. So that sort of investment is, again, doesn't seem to be spoken about much, doesn't seem to be taught very much. But to me, it's wildly significant and something that companies of any size and scale should think about very, very, very deeply. And I'm sure many of us on this session will have been let go in various ways through their careers, or you will be. And it tells you a huge amount when you are about that organization, and it will leave you with an enduring feeling, an impression, which you will share with all of your networks, professional and personal, and that will either do great benefit if you've been treated extremely well, as you should be, of course, or the opposite if you haven't been treated so well. Now, the other dimension, as we are pushing customer experience to the fore with so many organizations around the world, is whether there should be a chief empathy officer. Now, I know there's a lot of discussion, which I don't partake in, but I know it occurs around there being too many chiefs of chief information officer. That seems to be one that's kind of recognized as relevant to complement chief marketing and chief financial officer and so on and so forth. But I wonder whether, in actual fact, there should be a little bit more of a recognition that having a chief empathy officer could also be quite important. And I know for those of you who follow the excitable Gary Vaynerchuk, or Gary V, the American Belarusian entrepreneur and marketeer and thought leader and keynote speaker at many conferences, his organization has or had, I'm pretty sure she still works there, Claude Silver, who's the chief empathy officer, and I know other organizations do as well. And it could also be a chief experience officer, which I've also seen, particularly for companies in the sort of leisure park industries. But really, all organizations need, however they badge these particular roles or however they distribute the elements of those roles across other people's portfolios, they do need to build empathy and experience in for both colleagues and customers into every aspect of what they do. And I think one of the great positive fallouts really of the otherwise tragic and horrendous in terms of human cost COVID experience has been the recognition that experience and empathy is super super important, and that melds with a pre-COVID, but which has been accelerated by COVID, attentiveness towards the importance of mindfulness, of health, of preventative investment by companies and individuals in their own mental well-being and other forms of well-being, such that certainly with startups and more progressive companies, in America in particular, private healthcare, private counseling, access to private general practitioners, and so on and so forth, is becoming the norm. And an awareness of the emotional status or state of customers, of users of our platforms or experiences and services, that also is becoming incredibly important. And I suggest will only remain so, because there are always going to be choices for most customers, unless you could lock customers into contracts whereby they are stuck with you, which is never a great way to hold people really. Then we are all going to be forever competing ever harder for customers, support, trust, and commitment. And a lot of that will be driven by us being good at emotional management, anticipation of people's emotional state, of being empathetic, but also having ways of communicating to people that their expectations are perhaps incorrect, or who they think is responsible for a problem is not perhaps the person at a contact center, but maybe a government regulator or someone else. So there still remain some challenges about attributing responsibility when things do go wrong, of course. So I've put together two of the headings that I mentioned in my overview that I wanted to cover today, of developing an agile mindset and managing remote teams, because both are about agility really. And I don't really know that it matters that teams are remote really, as much as we need teams to be managed really well and really nicely and really effectively. And although the growth of Scrum and other approaches is in many ways extremely good, especially in software development and engineering and other scenes in businesses, sometimes they aren't the most people-centric ways of managing people or leading people. And I suppose this is an area that I'm still thinking about. Obviously, I'm still thinking about everything. I've not reached any settled conclusions about anything I've ever come across in life, really. I don't think there are many things which are immutable and always the case and forever. But for me, based on my professional experience as a practitioner trying to build capability in the grey matter of individuals, but also across organizations, I've really come to the conclusion that things like agile mindsets and the ability to manage remote teams well are kind of emergent properties, and they're always works in progress, and it doesn't take much to set things off track if there isn't a resilient organizational culture, a way of doing things, values and ethoses. But there are so many opportunities and benefits of doing things right. And to me, in order to have an agile mindset, to have a growth mindset, to have people inventing ideas, whether that's at a level of patents, that kind of type of intellectual property, or just maybe we could do X to attract more people into our tea shop in such and such a street. In order to get our people thinking in that way and feeling empowered and free and know they won't be mocked for their ideas, all of these require careful, an overused word, I guess, by me and everyone else, careful curation, careful, and careful and almost tender management, because these things are so kind of not fragile, but they're delicate. Let's just say. So to me, the whole notion of an agile mindset is definitely an emergent property. And for me, agility at the C-suite level is super important, whether it's about finding and recognizing that there are opportunities which should be followed up on, of recognizing when individuals or teams or a business function may have fallen into a heuristic trap, such as the sunk cost fallacy, where you kind of think we've put so much money into this, we need to keep going because we just need to keep going and everyone will look bad if we are shown to fail. Much better to have that more North American perspective on failure, which is that you learn through failing, and obviously that's particular types of failing in particular contexts. Patient deaths as a failure is not the way to learn about things. Exploring whether a new retail offer might work in a particular sector of a city, yeah, that's something we can afford to fail at, or pitching new ideas to existing customers and getting their input and feedback on those. That's also something we can try and maybe fail at, but through that failure we learn, in the same way that by exploring various paths through a jungle that we haven't explored before, they will come across some dead ends or some thickets which are too thick for our machetes to cut through, but we would only have discovered that by trying that route. So pulling back, trying another route, eventually we will find the one that's the path of least resistance. But trying is very important, obviously. So this emergent property is also one that needs to be enabled at all levels of an organization. It can't be as in probably until probably the last 20 years or so, but it's only the most highest paid people in the room, the hippos, who are the ones that have the big, powerful, valuable ideas. Actually, everybody needs to be freed up, to be democratized in that way, to realize that they could have a great idea which will improve either their little piece of the puzzle, or theoretically might have broader application both up and across the organization. But in order to achieve this, we do need, in the same way as I was talking about the power of brand depth earlier, a real deep and genuine trust with and from employees. And that doesn't occur overnight, although it can be started overnight. If you're starting a company from scratch, very difficult to create it if you've lost trust, but not impossible. But it does require some very obvious and honest investments and actions. But once you have it, it's really priceless. And to me, this is how amazing customer service is just made just absolutely reliable and consistent, where health and safety just becomes a normal way of operating because we do care about one another, where consistency of product or service and identification of cost savings or sticking to actions which save known costs or reduce known risks are assured. And it really means to me that great risk management can be implemented in organizations from the C-suite, by encouragement from the C-suite level, by freeing people up to do what they do best because they're closest to the front line and closest to satisfying the needs of customers, colleagues, and others. But again, because of the enthusiasm in the past for micromanagement and for accountability in a very negative way, then customer service and other things have tended to suffer because people feel much more that they're being monitored as opposed to being enabled to deliver something amazing. So Southwest Airlines achieves safe, fast, effective, enjoyable for everybody turnarounds of their aircraft because they have that deep and genuine trust, and everyone is in it together, and everyone recognizes that they have their own part to play in achieving that turnaround, and they are connected with that outcome. In many organizations, I feel that the person in the call center really has no connection with, haven't been given a connection with the reality of the individual at the other end of the phone, or the other end of the chat window in your browser. And I've had a few engagements recently with organizations where I've had some particular issue which I needed to get some support with, and it wasn't possible to answer it through FAQs and self-serve. So I did need to interact with people, and actually, I was distant enough from the emotionality that other people would have with the issues, that I could actually step back and say to the individual, I know you haven't been trained in X and Y, but I happen to know your organization has signed up to this code or this charter, and that what I should be expecting is this, and this, and I know that you're not able to give that to me, but please escalate this so that your manager can make sure that the company, the brand, lives up to the legal and other commitments which I should be able to enjoy. Now that's fine for me doing that, because it gives me a little bit of an anecdote to retell to lovely people like yourselves, and I can cope with the fact that the experience fell far short of the legal and other expectations, but that's also a failure of that organization to effectively train people, and then therefore effectively allow those individuals to solve problems for their customers, and that really matters. So being able to push down responsibility and trust, not just accountability, but responsibility and trust as well, is super important, and that's how avoidable mistakes will be avoided for the most part, but also that when people do make a mistake, they trust that the organization will look after them and allow them to bounce back from that situation. And again, that's something which those of us who've experienced that in the real world are hugely grateful for, and plays a lot into our sense of loyalty for those employers and managers who've extended those kindnesses to us, which we should all count on. Now, when it comes to excitement around neuroscience, I do get quite excited about these topics, although I don't know as much as I would like to know, something I'll do much more in the future. But neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to learn new ways of doing things, and becoming adaptable. Humans are adaptable almost by definition, really. These are common human capacities, but so often individuals aren't enabled to be adaptable and apply neuroplasticity. And being able to unlock and enable these facets of what it is that makes us human is, to me, something which is very uncommon, but when it is done is almost pricelessly valuable. Now, the problem with that is, of course, my next line actually gives a value. So I say pricelessly valuable, and I provide an actual price. So one of the great examples which is out there, and again, one of those things where so many of the students I've worked with over the years have brought case studies like this to me, or I've shared them with them. We're all kind of thinking, why doesn't everyone do this? This makes so much sense. Well, it's because trust, open communications in organizations remains fairly rare and elusive, and that's kind of stupid, but that's just really how it is. But Audi introduced a long time ago the concept of I'm going to call them suggestion boxes. They're not quite that, but they sort of are, where production line operatives could share ideas that they might have around increasing the efficiency of those product lines, whether it's about using fewer washers or having to do less rework or whatever it is, or just moving a bin of components a few meters to the left or right, so that you have to take 1 or 2 paces less per day, which obviously makes you less tired, which is probably good, but also means you can speed up by X number of seconds the production of a particular element of a vehicle drive shaft or something. Now, obviously, very small savings add up on production lines where there's a significant volume of materials going through. With slower production processes, then the improvements would have to be slightly larger in order to have an impact, but they're still there to be had. But with Audi suggestion boxes, and this is 1 or 2 years old, at least, I think, the case study behind this hyperlink, but there was an approach, well, the approaches that were taken forward by the committees which vet these suggestions saved over 110 million euros. Now, in 1 year. Now, if 110 million euros can be saved in an already highly efficient super well engineered production line in a very, very competitive industry vertical like automobile manufacturer, then that does suggest that there are even more significant savings out there in other organizations, whether in production of hard product or something else. So I think that's the inspiration, that there is money out there to be saved, but also that you could flip this and have further ideas about ways in which money could be made, in which you could empower people in call centers who are listening to customer complaints all day, every day. Maybe they will come up with ideas, possibly that customers even share with them, that could amount to new value propositions to put back to that public, to see what some of those user communities make of those new bundles of value, and which ones could be taken into production. I haven't really seen that done before, as much as I've seen these suggestion boxes for improving somewhat broken, somewhat inefficient production lines, but no reason why the principle couldn't be applied almost anywhere. The important thing to me was the human recognition at Audi that this sharing of information couldn't just be counted on, and you shouldn't do it, as I've been told in jobs I've had, do X because, well, we expect you to because you're paid, and where that thing, making suggestions, isn't actually part of your job description or your contract. So you can't really be counted on just to do it because you're a lovely person. Because also you want there to be a formal process where you learn why it is that your suggestion was or wasn't taken forward, and what would need to be done in future for an idea like that to be successful and to be put into implementation. Maybe you've overlooked the fact that there's such and such an environmental law or such and such a reason why a change can't be made. But Audi's incentivization means that individuals get a cash reward for suggestions which are put into place. Now, I have been aware of organizations elsewhere which also give a flat reward to individuals just for suggesting things. And to me, in an ideal world, maybe I'm a little naive here, it would be great to have both, which is to encourage, maybe even through a charitable donation rather than a direct cash reward just for the suggestion, but that having equity, as it were, in inverted commas, equity reward for coming up with a suggestion that is taken into use, into implementation, is really vital. And if you read that article, I don't want to guess at the numbers involved in it, but if you read that article, you'll see how much money was passed back to individuals who came up with these ideas. And again, what value does that give to the brand? How does that make employees feel? It's just, to me, magic. I really love it. I love the concept, and I would certainly love to see much more of that. And I would be stuffing suggestion boxes full of ideas, where my employers in the past willing to have those boxes available. Now, some of the ways in which we might implement at a conceptual level these delegations of trust, responsibility, also accountability to individuals. I've given two examples, one of which is from the armed forces, which I'm reasonably familiar with in the UK. Happens elsewhere in the world as well, but really it is about pushing that responsibility, the freedom, you could just call it freedom as well, down to the lowest level. So the commander's intent, so that's a strategic objective, excuse me, is shared with those lower ranks, but they're told what to achieve and why they need to achieve that thing, but then precisely how they're going to do it with a mix of resources, capabilities, time, space, etc., that are around, how they achieve it is up to them. Now, of course, the critical element here is that the commander's intent has to be realistic. So when subordinates are told what to achieve, it has to be achievable, and the why has to be legitimate, legal, appropriate, etc., etc. But in principle, the idea that individuals are left to decide how to achieve something is so great, and pushing that freedom of creativity and innovation down to the lowest possible level or levels is great. It makes people feel so much a part of an organization, and often it is one of the key elements why people stay in an organization, because that is done to them. And then when they rise up, if they rise up, they also recognize the value of doing that, and it really prevents, when properly implemented and open to abuse, of course, but it should properly prevent micromanagement, because a commander cannot know as well as the people on the ground what the situation is, even in an era of digitized data and so on. So allowing others to get on with things is a pretty important concept. Now, another thing which, as someone who doesn't have a military background but has worked a lot with defence professionals, something which I came to be very surprised by was mission command, but the other element of it was how often disagreement occurs in these groups who are told what to achieve and why, but are then left to decide how to achieve it. But also at higher levels, that there are, as you might expect in any organization, disagreements around a particular way forward. But ultimately, having a common purpose, having a shared goal, a shared vision, all those kind of buzzwords is super important. And although one particular person or a particular little coalition of individuals may win the day in terms of a direction of decision, a direction of travel, that there was disagreement before is forgotten. And we commit, as Jeff Bezos introduced at Amazon, this concept of disagree and commit, that we move forward, even though we began from a point of disagreement. Once a decision has been taken to go in a particular direction, everyone then makes their best efforts, invests their intellectual powers and energy to making it as achievable as possible in terms of that decision that's been made. If over time it's shown that actually that was the wrong decision, or maybe other variables have changed and that decision is no longer the best one, then that decision can be reviewed, of course, and organizations would have ways of doing that. And if we look at Amazon today, they are investing and not investing in things. You've probably seen in the news about you may have been affected, and I'm sorry if you have been, by layoffs in lots of the big tech companies as they close down certain units or reduce headcounts in certain units and shift investment to others. So that notion of open debate driven by a professional assessment of the challenge faced, as opposed to just a pure emotional response to things, or we've always done it like this, or my gut tells me X, which is a very unreliable to rely on your intestines in these matters. But disagreeing and then committing is something which I've seen exercised to great effect in the private and public sector, in particular in defence, and it leads to better outcomes. It leads to the feeling that people have had the opportunity to be listened to, or opportunity to speak and have been listened to, but ultimately a decision needs to be taken. And the great thing about hierarchies is that a decision is taken, and the more senior person then has a responsibility of defending that, should that transpire not to have been the best decision ever. But that culture that Amazon has created and curated and continued, others have sought to copy to some degree, super important, but it runs deep in the organization. The organization has all sorts of other challenges, of course, it's huge, but committing to a direction and not having a sort of a latent or a bubbling under series of conflicts which will later erupt is really, really important for the sustainability of a company and maintaining that agile mindset. You won't have sustainability or agility if people are still chafing or ruminating over a decision that they didn't agree with, but which took place a while ago. Now, when it comes to creating a new bespoke structure for companies, I'll just keep let's have a little look at how time's going. So I'll wrap up relatively soon. Creating new bespoke organizational structures and cultures. I wanted to give the perhaps unexpected example of Walmart. And this is a kind of a case I'm reading up more into through time, but I've listened to a series of podcasts by one of their VPs, Stompsky, who's mentioned down here, who heads up, I think she's VP of, I'm not quite sure what her full job title is, but one of the things that she's obsessed with, and I think is just amazing, is transforming Walmart into a dream-making organization. Now, Walmart is known for obviously retail, but being a huge employer, and picking up on my theme earlier of the progressive element of many American companies, because government has contracted, and companies are kind of stepping up to provide the healthcare and so on. Then Walmart is also offering education, and I think it's so impressive that the comment from this podcast down at the bottom, and there's links behind each of these screenshots or lumps of text, so you'll be able to follow up on the references afterwards. But help Stomsky talks about helping our associates achieve their dreams that they probably, for many of them, never thought could happen. And the idea that that kind of a big box retailer would be wanting its people to become better educated than they ever imagined they would sort of throws so much sand in the face of those who are negative about all capitalist business organizations, because actually Walmart and all other organizations of any scale and no scale know that their people need to become more and more skilled as the world becomes more digital, technologically complicated, and so on and so forth. And along with that increase in sophistication, of digitization, of technology, and so on and so forth, then the qualifications individuals will need, i.e. the badges that prove that they've been through learning, the requirement for those increases as well. And although in the past Walmart offered education schemes that gave transferable qualifications, not ones that lock you into a particular employer, transferable schemes of classes and therefore degrees. Previously, the program, the Daily Mail reports, required the workers to pay a $1 a day fee, which seems as that seems quite low. But if you're on low wages, even $1 is going to chafe and not be great. But now Walmart is spending over $1 billion over 5 years for career development for its people. Extraordinary investment. I mean, that's not a lot of money for a company of that size, but the fact that the company came up with the idea of doing that and has a vision of the future where they really want their people to know that they're on an escalator, should they want to be, I guess, if they want to be just at a checkout, I guess that's okay as well, each to their own, and so on and so forth, depends on the age and profile of the individuals. But if individuals want to, if these associates want to, Walmart is also an escalator that will transform those individuals' opportunities in a context of America where higher education is really an incredibly expensive activity, where yes, there are loans you could take out, but you may know more than me about how significant they are and how long they take to pay back. So Walmart offering this for free, along with the books to do your courses, is pretty extraordinary. And what else are they doing? Well, basically they're doing everything, right? They're huge. So another kind of example I found was technology that's transforming stores into fulfillment centers. We're seeing that in many places, I suppose, to some degree. There's lots of disagreement in the UK about to what degree supermarkets that are sending employees around shops, picking items from shelves to stock online orders, which are then collected or delivered by the customer, as to whether they can make any money at all, because it's quite expensive having an individual going around picking bananas off the shelf and weighing them and scanning them and so on. But by the looks of it, Walmart has some exciting tech, which okay, the article's about a year old, so probably needs a bit refreshing. But anyway, it's tech that's making stores fulfillment centers rather than using employees as shoppers to fill a trolley, which you then deliver to people. The other dimension of it, which again, don't know as much about this as I want to, Walmart seems to be like an amazing laboratory for ideas and investments. Prakar Mehrotra, excuse my pronunciation, speaks in a podcast with which business school is it? Oh yeah, Sloan, so MIT, on the range of ways in which AI is being implemented. And these are just the ways that they're speaking openly about things at Walmart, but using AI, I think I mentioned it in a slide in a moment or two, to begin to train employees for the challenges of Black Friday, when everybody kind of does crazy amounts of shopping in the States, as well as, I guess, working through the vast amounts of data they have on shoppers and their behaviors and so on, and ways of improving their supply chains, etc. Huge opportunities there. And I just wanted to point to a slightly older example here from a Harvard Business Review. You get a certain number of articles free per month, so you'll be able to read that in full as well, by Gary Hamel and Michelle Zanini, about Haier, the Chinese appliance maker, which is trying to make bureaucracy obsolete, which is something I think most of us can get behind. And Haier is a fascinating case study as well, which many of those of us in the West who think we know a lot about what happens in China really shows us we really don't. So that's a nice case study as well. So yeah, I hope you get some inspiration from those sources. And then I also think there's so many other great examples out there of businesses which were great before the pandemic and will be great after it, and have enabled some of us to survive through it. Enjoying great entertainment through Netflix, for example. So the culture manifesto of Netflix enables that organization to be endlessly reinventing itself digitally and otherwise. The whole approach developed by the late Tony Hsieh at Zappos, the holacracy perspective, which is now a spin-off arm, business consultancy arm within that, originally a shoe retailer as well, but again, an amazing example. I'll put in a link to the whole warrior spirit element of Southwest Airlines, which is a case study which to me just keeps on giving. There's so much to learn and pick up from Southwest Airlines that any service or non-service organization could learn from and inject it straight away into the DNA of any organization. The wonderful Tom Peters, who's amazing, Professor Tom Peters, who's amazing on Twitter and very accessible to people, has written many books, continues to write. In Search of Excellence is a classic, well worth picking up secondhand for a few pounds or dollars, but he's written other ones much more about putting humanity at the center of experience and looking after colleagues as well. But he gives away all of his PowerPoint presentations and other things on his website. So feel free to click on the gifts line there to pick up some of those. But what I wanted to say as well is that not all learnings are transferable, and some of the more excitable commentators and those who sell management training to C-suites and others are extremely keen on promoting the benefits of, for example, learning from elite rugby teams, Formula One, football teams, etc. Well, actually, not all of the lessons about high performance cultures do map well from the world of sport into the boardroom or into the hierarchy of organizations. Sometimes yes, but not always. So some caution needs to be invested. And one of the examples which I'll draw on, which probably no one will have heard of before, is the enthusiasm for a while for top elite military units to learn a lot from the great success of Tour de France style cycling teams like Team Sky, for example, which have achieved amazing things in the world of cycling. But cycling is again, I don't know a huge amount about cycling, but I know enough to know why there isn't a great analogy between the two. Cycling teams are interesting because they have superstars who are the ones who become, at least temporarily, household names, because I can't think of any right now. Mark Cavendish maybe might be one, I think. Anyway, those individuals are superstars and amazing, and often somewhat freaks of nature, having amazingly sized hearts and particularly large thighs and all that kind of thing. But apart from that, they're also treated as very special. So the ones who can win stages of a Tour de France or other big cycling races, or the whole thing from winning enough stages, they're looked after and enabled by other people in the team who are called domestiques, or like household servants. So they will, for example, ride in front of the superstar in bad weather or a headwind or something, so that it saves their legs, and the superstar can then power through at the end. So they sacrifice themselves in order for the superstar to win, which is not really something that we want to see in business. We don't want to see people sacrificing themselves. But it's also not a great way of structuring a military unit. You don't want a lot of people who are, doing all the hard work, and then some special person comes through and doesn't have a bag to carry, and someone else has been, cooking their food for them and whatever equivalent. So learning from those types of elite sports and trying to apply that to a boardroom, a military unit, or even another sport, it's just not going to work. I know in football, I'm on very thin ice with sport because it's not my strong point. I know in football you have people who set up goals and goal scorers, but they're at least sort of codependent in a more equal way than the domestiques supporting the superstars in cycling. So be careful of always be careful of vendors, but be careful in particular of vendors offering all sorts of training opportunities and amazing insights from sport into organizations. Now, this comes to the point of a total lack of modesty, but I just wanted to prove to myself, but also to show to you that some of this has been published in the open literature, admittedly quite a long time ago, 2015, but it was the first and I believe the only time this particular approach was mentioned in the open literature, because it describes a way of improving the capability, the resilience of organizations, and in particular the people in them, and their ability to draw on colleagues who can help produce options and model how decisions might play out in the real world, through very lean, by lean I mean cheap, and relatively easy to do, providing you're kind of robust in the research that you do, scenario driven exercises. So it's an article which I enjoyed writing, and hopefully it's a contribution that people can pick up on, use in the public and private sector anywhere. When it comes to relevant technology then, and I'll skip over this quite quickly because I think I've probably covered most of the spirit of what I mentioned on this slide already, and I really want to get to the final point. It's almost kind of self-evident, doesn't need me to say that COVID and other crises show that we're really dependent on technology, and that technology can sometimes be fragile, and we need the right blend. That's absolutely right. In preparing for crises, in my experience, whether that crisis is a new competitor or a crisis, a disaster, an economic downturn, that's always been constant and always will be. And lots of investment has taken place into hardware because you can see it, software sometimes because you need it for the hardware, but investment in the wetware, which is the grey matter, the human talent, much less so. And I think being able to realize that people are also technology, they both create technology, and technology enables them to achieve more than they could perhaps on their own, but the people are themselves a form of technology and a source of technological innovation, super important. And I had a chum in Oracle a few years ago who summed it up really nicely, that when it comes to thinking about cybersecurity, or particularly my current activities around user experience and software, integrating brains and bytes early on is really important. And if we're going to think about customer experience, colleague experience, customer experience of a software platform or process late in the day, and we're only going to pay lip service on it to just test things as the software goes out of the door, we've missed so many opportunities to make software much more intuitive, much more loved, and much more feeling as though it complements us as humans rather than something that we have to deal with because we want to renew an insurance policy or something. We do need to constantly try and unleash human capacity and capability. It's very interesting that so many people are so very keen on catastrophizing really about chat GPT and other things as being like the end of writers and journalists and everything else because this thing will just do everything. Well, it's a demonstrator algorithm. It's kind of clever, but it's a bit of a sideshow, really. I think decision support via machine learning, the whole type of ways in which we're seeing companies like Walmart really trawl through all their vast amounts of data to explore, to see what's there, to work out what the second and third order effects of a decision might be, which can kind of tune and make human creativity so much better and avoid avoidable risks, but create exploitable opportunities. Really, really powerful. So decision support to me is exciting. Chat GPT, conversational algorithms, etc. Sort of interesting, but as a sideshow, really. I'm really inspired by Walmart as a dream machine. Seems to me that Walmart in itself is a technology potentially for employees, for customers who might want to become employees, because then they get an education, and you get an education in an organization which is investing so heavily in machine learning, computer vision, sustainability, diversity, etc., etc. Sounds an amazing machine to be part of. And I really wanted to leave with a slightly cynical perspective on this, but you know, the aspiration at least is in the US armed forces that you leave employment with them fitter, smarter, and more employable than you went in. And I love that approach, that in any organization that someone joins, they should leave fitter, smarter, more employable than they began. And it reminded me of Richard Branson's famous quote that kind of goes against that view that many have, which is you shouldn't invest in your people because if you train them, they might leave. Well, actually, if you do invest in them and train them, they may never want to leave, and they may just constantly reinvent themselves. They may develop organically with you. If you suddenly have a need for people who can code, and you have people who would like to learn to code, they already know your organization, you know your customers, you know your values, your mission, etc. The only thing they don't know is how to code, but they'd like to learn. Train them. Why would they want to leave? They may get a better offer, but equally, if other companies are doing something similar, you'll get similar quality people coming back around. So everybody benefits. A rising tide lifts all boats, as they say. So that really concludes my thoughts. I appreciate I've probably gone on a little bit longer than you might have wanted, and I totally forgot that comfort break which I advertised. But I'm very happy to take any questions. And Sankit, I think you're going to be very generously managing that.
Right, thank you. Thank you for the session. So guys, now is the time for question and answer. So if anybody has any question, anything that you want to ask, feel free to go ahead and type it in the chat box. And you can also type in across all the social media channels, and I will go ahead and take them one after the other. Obviously, we have priority for the people who are attending the session today in Zoom over here. So if anybody has any question, feel free to ask. In the meanwhile, I already have some questions that I see coming up. Let me go ahead and bring them to your desk.
Thank you.
The first question that I have, it says, the young are gullible. I am not convinced they are the ones to lead. How important is youth leadership in today's time?
Ooh, that's a great question. I mean, as a parent of some relatively young people, I'm not sure that gullible is right. And I kind of think also that as an older person, I am also gullible in some fronts, and with things like social engineering and cybersecurity, there's ways to find gullibility in all sorts of folk. I think youth leadership is super important. I think a lot of young people are very cynical and have had quite poor experiences from their interactions with brands, organizations, and authority. And when I see, and I'm not talking here about my personal experience, but when I see more generally how young people are treated or increasingly still written off at quite an early age, and I'm talking here about in the UK, I do understand why the youth young people might feel drawn to certain causes which or ways of making money which are get rich schemes rather than something more sensible. But then again, look at the crash of cryptocurrency exchanges, which sucked in a lot of money from gullible older people. So it's a really interesting debate to have, I think. I think so many startups are run by really precociously young people, and they're doing so well. We can look at Bill Gates and others who started as college dropouts, but we can also look at Elizabeth Holmes, also a college dropout, who was driven by entirely the wrong sort of values and approaches. So I just think it's more complex than old versus young. But and I say that as a relatively old person. But it's tough being young. I would also say that. But I'm also hugely optimistic about humans everywhere. And yeah, I'm not sure that's answered your question, but it's I have reacted to it.
Well, you have explained it pretty well, I must say. Another question that I see coming is, oh, this is interesting. How is a leader different from an influencer?
Yeah, that's another awesome question, and yeah, that's a really good one. I think so many of our problems as professionals come down to terminology and definitions. I mean, to me, it would be impossible to be a leader without being able to influence people, but it probably is possible to be an influencer without being a leader. However, it's also possible to be an individual in an organization who influences people very negatively or very positively, and they're neither restrained or promoted respectively, because the organization doesn't see what they're up to. And I'm sure we've all, if you haven't yet, it's going to happen, come across people who are incredible barriers to change, hugely influential, but they are at best middle managers, and that's probably the wrong place for them, even that high, given the negativity, the toxicity, the inertia they can introduce. But equally, there are people who mysteriously perhaps rise to very important positions in organizations who aren't influencers. They're much more dictators, really. So to me, I don't know what the answer is here. I mean, charismatic leadership was one of the many categories of leadership proposed by theorists a while ago. And again, that's really the problem with a lot of the academic studies on these topics, is you tend to get these categories of things and lists of characteristics that people should have. And because influence cuts both ways. Influence can be persuading people to sign up to a scam, or it can be to encourage someone to put themselves forward for a promotion opportunity that she or he never thought they were capable of doing. So it's a really good question, and again, I would hesitate to come to a simplistic answer, which makes me feel a bit guilty. But yeah, that's the best I can do, I think, off the top of my head.
All right. So I have another question coming in from Heba, and it is: do you think after pandemic, leaders while creating new organizational structure, is there any need to include separate risk team and disaster management team, or just to incorporate in different sections? You can also see this question in the question and answer section. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, based on my experience in a wide range of organizations, I think the problem with separating things into different teams is that it just really fragments the same intellectual and organizational challenge in different ways. So to me, the idea that you would have business continuity planning and response, which was entirely different to cybersecurity planning and response, which is entirely different to a reputational issue. To me, they were all business continuity, but you could also call them something else. You could also just call them all risk, of course, which would, to me, would be quite sensible. I think the ways in which things get ever more kind of broken down into not even silos, but almost quadrants on a 4-box model, and that we then discriminate between preparation for one thing versus another. Whereas actually, if you can't get access to your headquarters building because of a fire, a terrorist attack, a cyber incident, whether it's caused by accident or crime or something else, the effects are the same. So really, by focusing on impact, on effects, in a sense, I think you can save a lot of money and time over and above preparing for loads and loads of specific things, which might be risk, pandemic, cyber, competition, etc., etc. To me, it's all about continuity, which is also about sustainability, which also feeds through into the wider environmental and corporate sustainability side of things. So I don't know, to me, I think a more organic approach, which sees all these things as kind of the same. There's uncertainty, there's opportunity, there's decisions that have to be made, there are consequences, there's communications we need to make, and it doesn't matter whether it's because COVID has hit a society or the globe, or whether it's a specific disgruntled employee has set fire to a building. The types of decisions that need to be made are kind of the same, except in scale. I hope that makes some sense.
Yep, it does. Let me just check the other questions also. Another one that I have is, how do I become a good leader without being stepped on?
Oh, yes. Yeah, this is another impossible question, but so
nice
realistic.
Question, yeah.
It's a really good one. That's really thoughtful, and I think no one has the single answer to that either, because, well, I suppose the key thing is if you're in an organization where it's okay for you to be stepped on, maybe that organization isn't where you should be, and that you should have an escape plan to get somewhere else. But that's not always possible or desirable. And why should you have to leave? I think finding those balances between being robust at the right time so that you are shielded from being stepped on, that you have people recognize you for being extremely open and friendly and adaptable and agile, but you do have boundaries and that there are limits. I think doing that is just such a lifelong activity, and yeah, that's an awesome question. I think the fact that you're asking that question probably means you're someone who really ought to be a leader. Makes me think that someone who asks a question like that should probably be a founder as well as a leader. I would love to work with someone who had thoughts like that. But in terms of protecting yourself, there's really only so much you can do, because if you're in a context where it's okay to bully people, to do them down, to pull rank, to use whatever levers of power they've got, there's only so much you can do to resist or protect yourself against that, which is why I guess as globally it becomes somewhat easier to move between organizations, that's what's going to happen. Value will flow to where it's appreciated. But that's not always easy for the individual. That's true at sort of maybe a macro level, but for individuals, it could be much more difficult. But it's a really good question.
It is, and probably I think emotional intelligence would also play an important role over here. So, perhaps we should do another session on that. That probably will throw some insight on this topic also.
For sure. Yeah.
Another question that I have is, oh, this is a nice one. I guess everybody will relate also. How do
Mm.
I show my leadership skills on my resume?
Yeah, because anyone can say they're a leader, right? And who's to disagree, but how do you stand out from all the other leaders? I mean, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I am not a resume expert. I wish I was, but I would think that this would come across best by you showing how you enabled other people to achieve outcomes, and possibly how you enabled other people to rise up. So one could be about delivery, about productivity or efficiency. The other side that you could find a way to explain is around how you encouraged people or enabled people to grow in themselves, whether that's about confidence. So you might, for example, coach and mentor people. Those are good terms to use always, so that they become more willing to run a session rather than just take notes. Then they might move to co-hosting it with you, and then they might lead to they might run, I don't know, an ideation session or a workshop or a focus group or running a survey or something. So I think showing practically that you've increased efficiency by making your team save X amount, that's great. That's hard figures, hard metrics. That's always nice to show, I believe, the quantitative side of it. But the qualitative, humanistic, more empathetic side of it, emotional leadership side, as Sanket was mentioning as well, is to show how you've had a positive effect on real people. And what better thing to have on your resume and your LinkedIn profile of showing that you coached and mentored someone to develop, and then they developed and they left you a positive recommendation, and they then got promoted, moved out, moved sideways, moved up, whatever, and name check you for being involved in that. So those would be my ideas off the top of my head, but I am not a resume expert, but I have seen those things done, and they're very impactful to me.
That is true, and that's very well explained. Perhaps adding some numbers, figures, in order to go ahead and justify that actually plays a very important role also, because when we go ahead and take interviews, that's one thing that we look at, what you achieved. So that again is a reflection of who you are, more or less. Data says 1,000 words. So that's
exactly.
All right. So Rachel wants to know any great books on leadership that you would recommend.
Oh wow. I should have better prepared for that question. I know that there's a Harvard Business Review edited volume on leadership. I think it may be called Leadership or something, but that's a really good one. I think also, and this is like, because I can't think of any other books, I'm just going to have to give this ridiculously broad suggestion. Is I think podcasts are a great way of finding out more about great books which are available, but also some of the case studies of successful businesses which are doing great things with leadership, which are not yet written in books, not yet written in academic papers, and may never be. So for example, Zappos and Tony say almost nothing written in the business literature about them, and the academic literature lags so far behind the real world, sorry to break it to you, that companies may come and go and explode and then reform in other ways, and the literature may be struggling because they're still talking about General Electric or something. So I would suggest finding books or examples from podcasts, but also look at the Harvard Business Review, because with that mix of academics and practitioners, or pracademics as they were called for a while, and consultants who are out there in business but also writing in that amazing publication, you get up to, I wouldn't say up to the minute, but up to the year, maybe up to the quarter, insights into what real companies are doing. So if you read nothing else, it would be to exploit the 5 or so free articles a month you can get through the Harvard Business Review, or if you're lucky enough to have a way of getting access to their current issue and past issues, you almost need to read nothing else. I know that's quite dangerous to say, but I think the Harvard Business Review is awesome.
I do follow Harvard Business Reviews. I cannot agree more with you. However, I would just like to add, 3 books that I actually feel are pretty good. Coming from an Indian heritage. So there are 2 which are uniquely Indian from our history. One is Chanakya's 7 Secret of Leadership, in which you understand that, and another one is by Spirituality and Leadership, if I'm right. That is by Swami Vivekananda. That's again a very good book. Another one that I'm absolutely fond of is a book called Kaizen, which is the Japanese method of transformation. So these 3 books really motivated me.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Any more question, guys? Anybody has any more question? Feel free to ask. The podcasts coming into the picture, the time spent on books has become less. So
yeah, but I think that's good though in a way, because
it's good. It's good.
Yeah,
it's good.
the books that do succeed will be really, really good ones.
That is true.
Because people just don't have the attention span for things that are just waffle, perhaps, and so audiobooks as well.
I absolutely love podcasts. I have replaced music with podcast while driving. So that's again a thing I can say.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a question that I think is more relevant for us. How important is doing an MBA to become an effective leader?
Ooh, that's a very good question. I think it depends what you do with the MBA, in the sense of what sort of person are you, because the thing about getting qualifications is that's it's more than half the battle. I don't want to undersell it at all, but it then enables you to go on and do other things. And to me, a master's degree is so powerful because it gives you permission to know what the tools and the templates, approaches, case studies, good examples are for leadership, for management, for empowering people, for emotional intelligence, etc., etc. But it also frees you up to amend, to improve on existing templates and ways of doing things, because you have put in the hard yards, as Americans call it, of the study, and you can create things yourself. And I think, to me, reflecting a lot on the overwhelmingly sort of white Anglo-Saxon middle-aged male predominantly characteristic of the academic world, full stop, but also in business schools, slightly less perhaps in the West, but largely, we are, it's really a very unrepresentative sample of humanity that's been pumping out all these ideas and insights. So the more that people who are not from those backgrounds, and those that are as well, of course, are out there coming up with new ideas, are amending conventional wisdom and altering templates, creating their own approaches, realizing that just because something is used by a lot of people doesn't mean that it's used equally well by everybody, should empower you to achieve things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to with the MBA. So it's not the question of the fact you're always learning and that just getting the qualification just pushes you on to the next phase of learning. No, it isn't really that. It's much more about that. It's that you've now got a tool set, or you know where to find tool sets, but you also know how to make those tools, and that's what's most powerful to me. So I think an MBA is really empowering, and you should regard it as a gold standard qualification, because it really is. It's not an easy thing to get, and it does separate you from so many other people, and it can be, if you harness it appropriately, a way for you to create your own future and have have the levels of freedom that you want in your career and in your intellectual development, and spread the word in your networks that an MBA is achievable and desirable.
That is very well said. And I do not see any more questions that I can take. I'll wait for 5 more seconds, guys. If there's any more question, anybody has any, feel free to go ahead and type it in, or we are going to go ahead and end this session now.
Thanks for your hard work there with the Q&A, Sanket. That was awesome.
Thank you. And thank you, all of you, for asking your questions. Your questions were really intellectual and really,
Agreed.
put
Really
us
tough.
to test. Yes, there is. And, this is what it is about leadership. There is no yes or no, most of the times. It's all perspective. It's how you go ahead and take things forward, So there is no right way or wrong way to be a leader, So that's again a thing.
Agreed.
All right, I don't see any more questions coming up, so I guess we are going to go ahead and call it a day. Thank you once again, all of you, for being a part of this session. Thank you for all your questions. Thank you for being a part of this session. Any last word, Dr. Mills, that you want to share with our participants today?
No, keep on being curious, keep on challenging conventional wisdom, keep on inventing new futures. And yeah, it's been a real pleasure and a privilege to speak to you all, and I look forward to interacting with you. If you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, ask me questions afterwards, you can get me on LinkedIn through Sanket and his good offices. And yeah, look forward to the next session.
Sure, we do. Thank you once again, guys, and I wish you all the best for your future. You have a wonderful day ahead. Bye-bye, take care, and stay safe. On that note, this is us signing goodbye.
Bye.
See you in the next session.